I never imagined that moving into what seemed like the perfect suburban neighborhood would end with me capturing the most chilling moment of my life on camera, a moment so shocking that even the police couldn't believe it at first. I thought I was buying peace, quiet, and a safe community, but instead, I found myself caught in a storm of HOA politics, petty complaints, and one woman who would stop at nothing to control everyone around her. They called her Karen, and at first, I thought that was just the typical neighborhood gossip, but little did I know this so-called HOA president was hiding a level of darkness no one could have predicted. One quiet night, while my neighbor was simply tending his garden, things escalated beyond anything I, or anyone, could have prepared for. My cameras caught it all, the shouting, the threats, and then, the unthinkable act that left one of us dead. Imagine watching someone's life get stolen right in front of your eyes, and realizing that the very person responsible was the one who claimed to protect the community. What would you do if the HOA president you'd been battling suddenly turned into a murderer, right in your backyard? Worse yet, what if she tried to shift the blame onto you? As terrifying as it sounds, this is exactly what happened, and the footage I held in my hands was the only thing standing between me and a lifetime of false accusations. This isn't just a story about HOA disputes or neighborly drama, it's about how far someone will go when their power slips away, and how a single camera became the weapon that unraveled Karen's empire. And trust me, the way the truth came out was something no one in this neighborhood will ever forget. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I genuinely thought I had found the kind of place people dream about when they think of the American suburbs. The houses were lined with neat little fences, the lawns trimmed to perfection, kids riding their bikes down the sidewalks, and neighbors who waved when you passed them. To me, it seemed like a fresh start, a quiet escape from the chaos of city life, and a chance to finally settle down somewhere that looked safe and welcoming. The HOA was advertised as a community-driven organization that kept everything organized, fair, and beautiful, and while I had heard a few horror stories about power-hungry HOA presidents before, I didn't think much of it. After all, how bad could it really be? Unfortunately, that was the question I would regret not asking sooner. Almost immediately, I noticed how much influence one woman had over everything, the HOA president, Karen. Now, I had heard the nickname, Karen, thrown around casually before, but this woman embodied the term with a kind of terrifying precision. From the moment I met her, I realized she wasn't the warm and welcoming type who wanted new neighbors to feel at home. She was sharp, calculating, and always seemed to be watching. The first time we spoke, she didn't ask me where I was from or what brought me to the neighborhood. Instead, she coldly reminded me of the community rules and mentioned that everyone was expected to keep up appearances. She was the kind of person who smiled when others were looking, but the moment her back was turned, that smile dropped into a scowl that could cut through glass. At first, I brushed it off. I figured she was just one of those uptight HOA presidents who took her role a little too seriously. But the longer I lived there, the more I realized she wasn't just strict, she was obsessed with control. She fined people for having their trash bins visible an hour too early, she sent warnings if your grass was half an inch taller than regulation, and she even showed up at one neighbor's door because their holiday decorations weren't tasteful enough. People whispered about her behind closed doors, but no one dared stand up to her. It was as if she had built an empire of fear inside this seemingly perfect community, and everyone was too afraid of fines, lawsuits, or social exile to challenge her authority. But there was one person who didn't bend to her rules, my neighbor, John. He was an older man, a kind soul who loved working in his garden and keeping to himself. From the very first day, he welcomed me with a smile, even offering me some of the tomatoes he grew in his backyard. Unlike most, he wasn't intimidated by Karen, and that made him a target. I learned quickly that John had a long, bitter history with her. For years, Karen had been trying to force him into compliance with the HOA's ever-expanding rules, but John wasn't the kind of man who gave up his independence easily. His garden, in particular, drove her crazy. She claimed it ruined the aesthetic of the neighborhood, even though everyone else admired it. To Karen, it was a symbol of defiance, a reminder that not everyone bowed to her demands, and she wanted it gone. The tension between them only grew over time. Karen would show up at his property, clipboard in hand, scribbling notes and threatening fines. John would laugh her off, refusing to be bullied. I remember one evening overhearing them arguing loudly near the property line, her voice shrill and commanding, his calm but firm. The rest of the neighborhood pretended not to notice, but I could see the way people glanced nervously out their windows whenever the two clashed. Everyone knew Karen held grudges, and when she felt challenged, she always found a way to strike back. Looking back now, I can see all the signs that things were building towards something darker. The smug way she looked at John after their fights, the way she told others in the neighborhood that he'd regret being stubborn, the notes she left on his door demanding compliance, each moment was a warning. But at the time, I thought it was nothing more than petty neighbor drama, the kind of thing that blew over eventually. I never could have imagined that her obsession with control, her hatred of being defied, would lead her down a path so violent, so irreversible, that it would shake the entire community to its core. And the worst part? I would be the one to see it unfold in the most horrifying way possible, through the silent, unblinking eyes of my security cameras. The first few months in the neighborhood gave me just enough time to see how quickly small disputes could snowball into full-scale warfare when Karen was involved. At first, it was almost laughable. She nitpicked over things so minor that most people wouldn't even notice. She once left a note on my door saying my porch light was too bright and disrupted the uniform aesthetic of the street. Another time, she sent a written warning because my trash cans were set out 30 minutes before the approved time. I thought it was absurd, and so did most of my neighbors, but nobody dared to call her out. When I joked about it to John, he smirked and said, "That's just Karen. She thinks she runs the world." But what he said next stuck with me: just don't let her get under your skin, because once you stand up to her, she'll make it her mission to destroy you. As the weeks passed, I saw exactly what he meant. John's garden became the central battleground of Karen's obsession. To most people, it was a patch of beauty, rows of vibrant flowers, tall sunflowers that swayed in the wind, and fresh vegetables that he grew year-round. But to Karen, it was a violation of her precious HOA handbook, a direct challenge to her control. I witnessed her march over to his property more times than I could count, waving her clipboard like a weapon. Their arguments grew louder, angrier, and more venomous with each passing encounter. One afternoon, I stood on my porch pretending to water the plants just so I could hear them. Karen's voice carried down the street, "This garden is an eyesore. It lowers the property value for everyone around you." John's calm reply cut through her shrieking, "Karen, if a few flowers lower the value of your house, then maybe your house wasn't worth much to begin with." Her face turned red, and she jabbed her pen toward him as though she could stab him with words alone. "You'll regret this," she hissed before storming away. It wasn't just the garden. Karen seemed determined to bleed him dry with petty fines. Every week, John received another notice. His shed door was the wrong shade of brown, his mailbox was an inch too tall, his lawn furniture wasn't HOA approved. John, stubborn as ever, refused to pay a single dollar. Instead, he pinned the notices to his fence for the whole neighborhood to see, like trophies from a long-running war. People whispered about it, some admired his courage, but most kept their heads down, terrified Karen would redirect her fury toward them. The real turning point came during an HOA meeting. These gatherings were usually dull affairs, budget talks, landscaping updates, complaints about parking. But this one turned into a spectacle. Karen stood at the front of the community hall, her voice dripping with authority as she launched into a tirade about John's garden. She accused him of willfully violating community standards, of endangering the harmony of the neighborhood. She even suggested the HOA should take legal action to force him into compliance. John, sitting calmly in the back, raised his hand. When Karen reluctantly called on him, he stood and addressed the room. His words were simple, but they cut deeper than anything I'd ever heard. "I bought my home. I pay my taxes. I work in my garden because it brings me peace. And I'll be damned if some self-appointed dictator thinks she can tell me what I can or can't grow on my own land." The room went silent. A few people clapped quietly, but most avoided eye contact, afraid of being seen siding against Karen. Her face twisted into something I can only describe as pure rage. She slammed her binder shut and ended the meeting abruptly, but not before locking eyes with John and saying, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're going to regret this." The threat hung in the air long after the meeting ended. From that night on, I noticed Karen's behavior shift from petty to personal. She no longer just fined John, she harassed him. She called in bogus noise complaints when he worked in his yard, claiming his gardening tools were too loud. She accused him of attracting pests with his compost bin, even though everyone knew it wasn't true. Once, I caught her standing at the edge of his property late at night, flashlight in hand, scribbling notes like she was gathering evidence for some kind of trial. When I asked what she was doing, she snapped at me, "Community business. Stay out of it." Then she stomped off into the shadows. The hostility escalated further. John confided in me one evening while we sat on his porch. He admitted that Karen had left threatening notes in his mailbox, telling him to stop resisting or he'd face consequences. He brushed it off with his usual humor, saying, "She's all bark, no bite," but I could see the unease in his eyes. I tried to reassure him, but deep down, I knew Karen was spiraling. Her desperation to control the situation bled into her interactions with everyone else, too. She snapped at kids riding their bikes on the sidewalk, accusing them of damaging HOA property. She scolded a mother for leaving her stroller near the community pool. People began avoiding her altogether, crossing the street when they saw her coming. Yet, no matter how much she alienated herself, she seemed fixated on one thing: breaking John. The scariest moment came about a week before everything fell apart. I was coming home late from work when I saw Karen standing in John's garden, of all places, pacing back and forth. Her fists were clenched, and she was muttering to herself. At first, I thought maybe she was talking on the phone, but then I realized she wasn't holding anything. I stopped in my tracks and listened. Her voice was low but furious. "He thinks he can defy me. He thinks he's safe. He won't be safe forever." My stomach dropped. I wanted to confront her, but something about the way she moved, jerky, unsteady, unhinged, made me freeze. Eventually, she stormed out of the garden and disappeared into the night, leaving me shaken. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. It wasn't just petty HOA drama anymore, it was obsession, pure and dangerous. Karen wasn't satisfied with fines, warnings, or intimidation. She wanted total control, and when she couldn't get it, she seemed willing to burn everything down to prove a point. And in just a matter of days, that simmering tension would explode into the most horrifying act this neighborhood had ever witnessed, one that would change everything forever. It was the kind of summer evening that should have been peaceful, the kind where the sun lingers on the horizon and the air smells faintly of fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers, but for me, there was an unease I couldn't shake from the moment I woke up that morning, a gnawing tension that told me something wasn't right, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Perhaps it was the way Karen glared at John when she drove past earlier that day, or maybe it was the way she slammed her car door so hard it echoed across the cul-de-sac, but the air felt heavy, charged with a quiet hostility, and I remember telling myself that I needed to finish setting up the new security cameras I had bought the week before, just to have peace of mind. I had always been cautious, especially after noticing Karen creeping around John's yard at night, and part of me thought it was paranoia, but another part of me felt certain that she was teetering on the edge of something worse than fines and complaints, so I spent most of the afternoon installing those cameras, one pointed at my driveway, another at my backyard, and most importantly, one angle just right to catch the stretch of fence that divided my property from John's garden. As the sun dipped lower, painting the neighborhood in gold, I could see John out there, tending to his plants the way he always did, his wide-brimmed hat tilted against the light, his hands busy pulling weeds and staking tomato vines, and there was something calming about it, almost reassuring, though every so often he would pause, stand up straight, and glance toward the street as if expecting trouble. The neighborhood was oddly quiet that evening, no children playing, no neighbors chatting, just the hum of cicadas and the occasional bark of a dog, and that silence made every little sound sharper, more noticeable, so when the low rumble of a car engine approached, it felt louder than it should have been, like a warning. I looked up just as Karen's silver SUV rolled to a stop in front of John's house, her headlights still on though it was barely dusk, and even from my porch I could feel the hostility radiating off her. She slammed the door, heels clicking against the pavement like a drumbeat, and stormed up the sidewalk without hesitation, her clipboard clutched in one hand as though it were a weapon. John didn't look up at first, too focused on trimming a row of sunflowers, but when her sharp voice cut through the still air, "You think you can just ignore me forever, John?" He froze, wiped his hands on his jeans, and finally turned to face her. His voice was calm, almost weary. "Karen, not tonight. I've told you, this is my land, my garden, and you don't get to dictate what I do here." Her laugh was short, bitter, more like a bark than a laugh, and she stepped closer, pointing that pen of hers directly at his chest. "You're destroying this neighborhood's value with your mess, and if you think you can get away with it, you're wrong. Everyone's tired of you, and I'm not going to let you embarrass me again like you did at the meeting." The words hung in the air, heavy, venomous, and I remember gripping the railing of my porch, torn between going inside to avoid being dragged into their fight and staying put in case things got worse. The camera I had just installed blinked its tiny red light, recording silently, and I told myself I was being paranoid, that nothing serious would happen, but deep down my gut screamed otherwise. Their voices rose, sharp and angry, echoing down the empty street, Karen's shrill accusations clashing with John's steady defiance, and then came the first sound that made my skin crawl, a metallic scrape, faint but distinct, like something heavy being dragged or pulled from her bag. I couldn't see what it was from where I stood, but John's posture changed instantly, his calm demeanor slipping into one of caution, his hands raised slightly as if to pacify her. "Karen," he said, firmer now, "put that away, you don't know what you're doing." The words froze me in place. What had she pulled out? My heart pounded as the cicadas seemed to grow louder, the sky dimming into twilight, and a chill ran through me even though the air was still warm. The whole neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by the sound of Karen's rage-filled voice and the creak of John's garden gate swinging shut as he tried to step back, creating distance. The stage was set, though none of us, not even John, knew just how far she was about to take it, but as the shadows deepened and the faint red glow of my camera blinked on, I realized with a sinking certainty that this was no longer just a feud, no longer just a battle of wills, but the prelude to something far darker, something I would later wish I had only imagined, because within minutes the peace of that summer night would shatter, and what unfolded next would be burned into my memory forever. The moment that night tipped from tense confrontation into outright horror is etched in my memory with a clarity I can never erase, and even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see every frame of the footage my camera captured, every sound that ripped through the quiet neighborhood as the unimaginable happened. Karen stood in John's garden, pacing back and forth like a predator circling prey, her words slashing through the air with venom as she berated him for his so-called defiance, accusing him of disrespecting the HOA, ruining the neighborhood, and embarrassing her in front of the board, and all the while John stood tall, tired but resolute, refusing to give her the satisfaction of fear. His voice carried steady resolve as he told her again that she had no authority over his property, that her obsession was out of control, and that she needed to leave before she did something she couldn't take back. For a moment, I thought maybe he had gotten through to her, because she stopped pacing and stood still, her chest heaving, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the porch light, but then she reached into her bag with a sudden, jerky motion, and when her hand came out, I saw the glint of steel, and my blood ran cold. In her fist was a gardening tool, one of those heavy steel trowels with a sharp edge, but the way she held it was not like someone about to plant flowers, it was like someone ready to strike. John took a cautious step back, his hands raised defensively, his voice firmer now. "Karen, put that down, you're not thinking clearly," but she wasn't listening anymore. The fury that had been simmering in her for months, maybe years, had erupted into something primal, something violent, and in her eyes there was nothing but rage. The footage shows it all in painful detail, Karen shouting incoherently, lunging forward as John tried to move back, the trowel flashing in the dim light as she swung wildly. The first blow caught him on the shoulder, and his pained grunt echoed through the night. He stumbled, trying to shield himself, but she pressed forward, relentless, her shrieks piercing the silence of the neighborhood. "You won't defy me anymore," she screamed, and the words still ring in my ears like a curse. John tried to grab her wrists, tried to wrestle the tool from her hands, but she fought with a manic strength that seemed impossible for someone her size, and as they struggled, the camera's red recording light blinked steadily, capturing every second of the nightmare. I remember gripping my porch railing so hard my knuckles turned white, frozen between the instinct to run over and stop it and the fear that she would turn on me too, and by the time I forced myself to move, it was already too late. The final moment is something I wish I could unsee, Karen wrenching her arm free, raising the trowel high, and driving it down with a force that made a sickening sound as it connected. John gasped, staggered, and collapsed onto the ground among the very flowers he had so carefully tended, the life draining from him as his garden became the scene of his murder. Karen stood over him, chest heaving, the tool still clenched in her shaking hand, and for a long moment she just stared down at what she had done, her face a twisted mask of rage and satisfaction mixed with shock. Then, as if snapping back to reality, she dropped the weapon into the dirt, wiped her hands on her skirt, and looked around frantically, scanning the darkened houses to see if anyone had witnessed her crime. I ducked behind my porch post, heart pounding so loudly I thought it would give me away, but she didn't notice me. Instead, she muttered something under her breath, something chilling like, "Finally, it's done," and stumbled back toward her car, leaving John's lifeless body in the soil he had loved so much. I remember the world feeling unreal in that moment, as if I were trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The neighborhood was deathly still, not a curtain moved, not a door opened, as though everyone had heard but no one dared to intervene, and I stood there trembling, torn between running to John's side and calling for help. My legs finally obeyed, and I rushed inside, fumbling with my phone as my mind raced, dialing 911 with shaking hands and struggling to make my words coherent. "My neighbor, she killed him, I saw it, I have it on camera," I stammered, my voice breaking, and the dispatcher's calm questions barely anchored me as I tried to explain. Every second until the sirens arrived felt like an eternity, and I kept replaying the images in my head, the look in Karen's eyes, the way John had fallen, the eerie stillness that followed. When the flashing lights finally pierced the night, painting the street in red and blue, I led the officers straight to the garden. Their radios crackled, their boots crunched against the gravel, and then there was silence again as they took in the sight of John's body among his flowers. One officer muttered a curse under his breath, another called in for backup, and I stood there numb, unable to do anything but point toward the security camera still blinking on my house. "It's all there," I whispered, my throat tight, "everything, you'll see." Even as they secured the scene and began their grim work, I knew the footage on that tiny device was now the most important evidence in the world, the only undeniable record of what had happened, and without it, Karen would twist the truth like she always did. Later, sitting in my living room as an officer reviewed the recording on my laptop, I felt my stomach churn as the images played back. Watching it once had been unbearable, watching it again felt like reliving a trauma that seared deeper each time. The officer's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as Karen's attack unfolded on screen, and when the final blow landed, he exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "This isn't just assault," he said gravely, "this is murder, plain and simple." His words hit me like a weight, finalizing what my brain was still trying to reject, that my neighbor, the kind man who had welcomed me with homegrown tomatoes and laughter, was gone forever, taken not by accident or illness, but by the hands of a woman who had been consumed by power, ego, and rage. That night, as the paramedics finally took John's body away, as neighbors peeked from their windows whispering in horror, and as the police issued an all-points bulletin for Karen's arrest, I sat on my porch staring at the garden across the fence, the flowers still standing tall as if refusing to acknowledge the blood spilled among them. It felt wrong that the world continued turning, that the cicadas still hummed, that the stars still shone, when something so monstrous had just shattered our small community. I knew then that my life, and everyone's lives here, would never be the same again, because we had all underestimated her. We had all thought Karen was just another power-hungry HOA president, when in reality, she was something far darker, something capable of murder, and I had the proof blinking in red light to show it. When the police finally tracked Karen down the next morning, she was sitting smugly on her porch like nothing had happened, sipping from a coffee mug as if she hadn't spilled blood in a man's garden only hours before. I was standing across the street with 2 officers at my side, my laptop in hand, the footage queued up and ready. Up until that moment, part of me feared that no one would believe me. After all, Karen had built an image of herself as the protector of the neighborhood. She was the HOA president, the one who held meetings, enforced rules, and wore that mask of authority so convincingly. But I had what she didn't know existed, the cold, undeniable truth recorded by my cameras. When the officers walked over and announced that they needed to speak with her, Karen's face shifted into one of mock confusion. "Officers, what's going on? Is this about John? I heard the sirens last night." "Such a shame," she said, shaking her head in fake sorrow, though her eyes flickered with something harder to read. "You know, I always worried about him. He was unstable, sometimes aggressive. Wouldn't surprise me if he finally snapped." She tried to twist the narrative immediately, her tone dripping with false concern, already laying the groundwork to cast herself as a victim. That was when the lead officer gestured toward me. "We'd like you to see something, ma'am." Karen glanced in my direction, her expression tightening just slightly, a crack in her facade. I stepped forward, opened my laptop, and hit play. The footage appeared on screen, the grainy nighttime view of John's garden glowing faintly. At first, she seemed confident, even dismissive, crossing her arms as if expecting nothing more than harmless neighborhood bickering. But as the video unfolded, her voice shrieking, the weapon in her hand flashing in the light, the brutal attack laid bare, her face drained of color. She blinked rapidly, her jaw clenched, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsettled. When the final moment played, John's collapse into the flowers, the sickening quiet after, the officers turned their gaze to her. Karen tried to recover. "This isn't what it looks like," she snapped, her voice rising with desperation. "He attacked me first, you can't hear what he said, you don't know how he threatened me. That video doesn't tell the whole story." She gestured wildly, sweat breaking on her forehead. "He was dangerous, I was defending myself." But the officers didn't move, their expressions hard, unimpressed by her theatrics. One of them rewound the footage, playing it again, pausing at the moment she raised the tool high over her head. "Looks like you're the aggressor here, ma'am," he said flatly. "There's no weapon in his hands. He's trying to defend himself from you." As her excuses faltered, she shifted tactics. "This is harassment," she snapped, turning her venom on me. "He doctored this. He hates me, he set me up, look at how conveniently his camera caught everything. This is a conspiracy to ruin me." She stepped closer, jabbing a finger in my direction, her voice cracking now with panic. "You've always been against me, you're trying to destroy this HOA and drag my name through the mud." But if she thought the neighbors would rally to her side, she was sorely mistaken. By then, word had spread, and a small crowd had gathered at the edge of the street, whispering and pointing. These were the same people who once feared her, who obeyed her rules in silence, but now they stood watching as the mighty HOA president crumbled under the weight of evidence. I saw in their eyes something I had never seen before, relief. Still, a few members of the HOA board hesitated. One, a timid man who always sat silently beside her at meetings, stepped forward nervously. "Maybe there's some explanation," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Karen's always had the community's best interest." His words died as the video replayed again, the weapon glinting, John's final fall undeniable. The crowd gasped, the truth hammering down with each frame. Even the ones who once enabled her control couldn't shield her anymore. The officers made their decision swiftly. "Karen, you're under arrest for the murder of John Miller," the lead officer declared, stepping forward and pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Karen's eyes widened, and in a final act of desperation, she screamed, "No. You can't do this to me. I am the president of this HOA. I built this neighborhood. You all need me." She thrashed as the officers grabbed her arms, trying to twist free, her coffee mug shattering on the ground beside her. The neighbors gasped, some clutching each other as they watched the scene unfold. The woman who had terrorized them for years finally brought low. Her shrieks echoed down the street as the handcuffs clicked into place, but nobody moved to help her. Instead, I noticed something remarkable. Neighbors who had once kept their curtains drawn whenever she raised her voice now stood openly, watching her dragged away, their faces filled with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, was being paraded past them like a criminal, and for the first time, the power she clung to so tightly was gone. She screamed about lawsuits, about revenge, about how we'd all pay for turning on her, but her words fell flat. The sight of the patrol car door slamming shut behind her was the moment we all realized the reign of Karen was over. As the car pulled away, the officers assured me the footage would be secured as evidence, and one even clapped me on the shoulder, saying quietly, "You probably saved yourself and the rest of the neighborhood with that camera." I nodded numbly, still shaken, but a strange wave of relief coursed through me. The weight of fear that had hung over us for months, maybe years, had lifted, replaced by a somber silence. My neighbors slowly dispersed, whispering to one another, some in shock, others already talking about how different things would be without Karen looming over every detail of their lives. But I didn't celebrate. I stood rooted on the sidewalk, staring at John's house, at the garden now marked with police tape, and felt a hollow ache. Justice had been served, yes, but it had come too late to save him. Karen's arrest didn't erase what she had done, it didn't bring John back to tend the flowers he loved. All it did was ensure she couldn't hurt anyone else. And as I closed my laptop, the image of her face frozen mid-swing still burning on the screen, I knew that no matter how loudly the neighborhood cheered her downfall, the true cost of her madness would never be forgotten. When the patrol car carrying Karen disappeared around the corner, the neighborhood exhaled in unison, as if we had all been holding our breath for years. For the first time since I had moved in, the street felt strangely calm, no eyes watching from behind blinds, no angry notes shoved into mailboxes, no threats disguised as rule enforcement. People stepped out of their houses tentatively, like survivors after a storm, testing the air to see if it was truly safe. A few neighbors approached me, some offering quiet thank yous, others shaking my hand firmly, their gratitude etched deep into their faces. One elderly woman, who had lived here longer than anyone, whispered, "We should have stood up to her years ago, maybe John would still be here." Her words pierced me, because I had been thinking the same thing. Justice for John came swiftly in the days that followed. The footage was undeniable, and Karen's endless excuses collapsed under the weight of the evidence. The police charged her with murder, and the HOA board, stripped of its leader, dissolved in disgrace. John's funeral was packed with neighbors who had once kept their distance out of fear of Karen's wrath. Flowers covered the church steps, people sharing stories of how he had always been kind, always willing to lend a hand, even when Karen's rules made his life miserable. It was bittersweet. Justice had come, but only after the loss of a good man whose only crime was tending his garden in peace. As for me, I found myself reflecting more than I ever thought I would about what had happened. I moved into this neighborhood expecting the usual suburban quirks, trimmed lawns, holiday lights competitions, maybe the occasional petty dispute. I never thought I'd be the one holding a camera that would expose a murderer. I never thought HOA drama could turn into blood on the grass. And yet, it had. That reality sits heavy with me even now, every time I walk past John's garden. The flowers still bloom, though now tended by volunteers from the block, as if we all silently agreed that his memory deserved to live on in the soil he cared for. Karen's downfall didn't just free us from her tyranny, it forced us to face how fear had kept us silent for too long. We had all watched her cruelty, endured her harassment, and told ourselves it was easier to stay quiet. But silence allowed her power to grow unchecked until it consumed a life. That realization changed us. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now gather regularly, not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. The garden has become a symbol, a place where we meet, where we talk, where we remind ourselves that no single person should ever wield that much control again. And me? I carry both relief and sorrow. Relief that the nightmare is over, sorrow that it had to end this way. But if telling this story keeps even one person from ignoring the warning signs in their own neighborhood, then John's death, and the footage I captured, won't be in vain. Because sometimes the monsters aren't strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes, they live right next door, hiding behind HOA bylaws and fake smiles, until the truth finally drags them into the light. If you thought this story was wild, trust me, you haven't heard anything yet. Karen being exposed and arrested might feel like the end, but in neighborhoods ruled by ruthless HOA Karens, the drama never truly ends. The truth is, Karen wasn't the only one pulling strings in this community, and what I discovered after her arrest will absolutely blow your mind. These HOAs are more than just petty rule enforcers, they're breeding grounds for power-hungry neighbors who think they own everything around them. And if one woman was willing to kill to keep control, imagine what the others are hiding behind those perfect lawns and forced smiles. So if you want to hear the rest, the secrets, the scandals, and the shocking revenge that followed, you need to stick with me. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and join me for the next story that'll make this one look tame. Because trust me, the nightmare didn't end with Karen's arrest, it was only the beginning.